Today, the world's three great monotheistic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, shape the lives, laws, and values of billions. Together, they've guided civilizations, inspired art and ethics, and also sparked centuries of conflict and misunderstanding. But it wasn't always this way. Long before Islam and Christianity existed, and before Judaism evolved into monotheism, the ancient world was polytheistic. The divine was seen not as one being, but as a vast, interconnected web of forces: nature, emotion, fate, creation, and destruction. Each god represented a different aspect of life, and worship was as much about understanding the self as it was about honoring the heavens. In ancient Egypt, one of the first recorded experiments with monotheism appeared under Pharaoh Akhenaten, who worshipped a single god, the Aten, symbolized by the sun. For a brief moment, Egyptian religion focused on one divine source behind all creation. But after Akhenaten's death, Egypt returned to its old gods. The idea, however, didn't disappear. It took root in the Near East, where early Israelite tribes began to move from a belief in many gods toward loyalty to one, Yahweh. This was not yet full monotheism, but henotheism, the belief that one god should be worshipped above others. Over centuries, through exile, conquest, and reform, this evolved into a truly monotheistic faith, Judaism. From Judaism came Christianity, which began as a Jewish movement centered on renewal, compassion, and inner transformation. Jesus was Jewish. His followers were Jewish. They spoke in the language of prophecy and symbolism, drawing from texts that were never meant as literal history, but as spiritual allegory. A few centuries later, in Arabia, a new faith emerged, Islam, which drew upon both Judaism and Christianity. Islam acknowledged Abraham, Moses, and Jesus as prophets, but saw Muhammad as the final messenger, sent to restore clarity after what it viewed as the corruption of earlier teachings. In many ways, Islam began as both a response and a correction, an attempt to unify belief in one God and resist the political and religious dominance of the expanding Christian empire. All of these religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, are not simply systems of belief. At their core, they are journeys. They're stories of exile and return, sin and redemption, death and resurrection. Were never just records of the past. They were teaching tools, written in the language of myth and symbol, to map the evolution of human consciousness. The story of Moses leading the Israelites out of Egypt wasn't just a political liberation. It was about freeing the mind from bondage, escaping ignorance and illusion to reach an inner promised land. The salvation that Jesus spoke of wasn't about escaping the world after death. It was about transforming the heart here and now. These are the same principles once taught in the ancient mystery schools of Greece, Egypt, and the Mediterranean. Traditions like the Eleusinian mysteries, which used symbolic rituals to explore death, rebirth, and enlightenment. Over time, these ideas evolved into what we now call Gnosticism, the belief that spiritual truth is found through inner awakening rather than external authority. But when the Roman Empire adopted Christianity, something changed. The mystical, symbolic teachings that had been part of early Christianity, the Gnostic and mystery school traditions, were declared heretical. The Roman Church wanted unity, hierarchy, and control, so it literalized the myths, turning symbols into history and metaphors into dogma. The parables that once spoke of inner rebirth became statements of external fact. The stories that once described psychological transformation became historical events. And those who continued to interpret Scripture symbolically were branded as blasphemers and were silenced or destroyed. Over centuries, that suppression buried much of the ancient symbolic language, the universal bridge between science, philosophy, and spirituality. When Islam arose in the 7th century, it inherited both the wisdom and the wounds of these earlier traditions. It recognized the prophets of Judaism and Christianity, but sought to bring unity under one clear revelation. Yet, as Islam expanded, it found itself in the same struggle that had reshaped Christianity. The tension between inner meaning and outer authority, between the mystic and the literalist. And so, the conflict we see today among these three faiths, and even within them, is not just political or theological. It's a reflection of an ancient split in the human mind, between those who seek truth through symbol and introspection, and those who seek certainty through law and structure. The prophets of ancient scripture were not meant to be historical celebrities. They were personifications, embodiments of wisdom, courage, compassion, and truth. They were archetypes, not biographies. But when Muhammad claimed to be a living prophet in the line of these symbolic figures, it created a profound shift. Now, prophecy was not metaphorical. It was historical, embodied, and real. That move, while unifying for many, also deepened the divide between symbolic understanding and literal belief, a divide that continues to shape global culture today. Had Christianity, or any of these faiths, remained fluid, symbolic, and self-renewing, it might have continued to evolve with humanity's expanding knowledge of the universe. Instead, by freezing its teachings into dogma, it lost the flexibility that made it powerful. The true message, the one shared across Moses, Jesus, and even the mystery schools, was about transformation, not control, about awakening, not obedience. When you strip away the literal interpretations, the exodus of Moses and the salvation of Jesus are both metaphors for spiritual evolution, two languages saying the same thing. The divine is not found in the sky or in a book, but in the awakening of human consciousness. Today, our world is split between two camps. On one side, religious fundamentalists who take every story literally, missing the depth beneath the words. On the other, atheists and skeptics who dismiss those stories entirely, missing the symbolic wisdom hidden within them. Each side holds part of the truth and part of the blindness. If they could meet in the middle, we might recover what was lost. The ancient synthesis between reason and reverence, between science and spirit, between the language of evidence and the language of meaning. In the end, the story of religion is the story of humanity itself, our attempt to understand the mystery of being alive. Whether we call it God, consciousness, or creation, we are all tracing the same light through different stained glass windows. The real task is not to prove who's right, but to remember what these stories were meant to do. Not divide us into believers and unbelievers, but awaken us together to the deeper unity that was always there.